Why do people break rules? Our first instinct is usually to blame the person, right? A bad choice, some kind of moral flaw. But what if that's the wrong way to look at it entirely? What if breaking the rules has less to do with the person and way more to do with the world they live in? Let's get into the sociology behind why we don't always play by the book. And really, this is the big question, isn't it? Is a rule breaker a deviant, someone who's just failed to meet society's standards, or are they simply different, maybe operating by another set of rules we just can't see? Well, sociologists argue that the line between those two is a lot thinner and, frankly, a lot more interesting than you might think. So, to really get our heads around this, we're going to look at nonconformity through four totally different sociological lenses. Think of it like this. Each one gives us a completely new perspective, and we're going to start by zooming in on the individual, and then pull back wider and wider until we're looking at the whole structure of society itself. Okay, first up, the individual lens. This theory suggests that maybe rule-breaking isn't always some big, conscious act of rebellion. Sometimes it's just a matter of education. I mean, what if someone was never really taught society's rules to begin with? Sociologists have a term for this. They call it under-socialization. See, we all learn the rules and values of our society, our moral compass, if you will, mostly from our families. But what happens when that process is, incomplete? If a family can't provide that clear guidance, or maybe even accepts behavior that mainstream society calls deviant, well, a person might never fully download the official rulebook. Now, this links to a really controversial idea called cultural deprivation. And let's be super clear. This is not about one culture being worse than another. Not at all. It's about the idea that certain groups might hold values that just don't line up with what the dominant culture, especially places like schools, says you need to succeed. Think about it like this. To do well in school, you've got to be good at deferred gratification, putting in the hard work now for a bigger payoff way down the line. But what if your culture values immediate gratification more, enjoying the moment instead of waiting for some reward in the distant future? It's not that one is right and one is wrong, but there's a serious mismatch with how the school system works, and that creates a real disadvantage. Okay, but hold on. What if rule breaking isn't about failing to learn the rules, but about learning a completely different set of them? Our second lens shifts the focus from the individual to the group they belong to, and it proposes something pretty radical. What if what we call deviance is actually a form of conformity? So, way back in 1962, a sociologist named Walter Miller pointed out some key values in certain working-class subcultures. Things like placing a high value on toughness, craving excitement, and having this deep, deep distrust of authority. Now, you can probably see how those values would directly clash with what mainstream society and figures like the police expect. And this is the absolute key insight. From inside their own subculture, these individuals aren't being deviant at all. They are conforming perfectly. They're just following the rules that get them status and respect with their friends. It totally forces us to ask, is that person a deviant, or are we just judging them by the wrong rulebook? All right, now let's zoom out even further. Our third lens, the societal lens, flips this whole thing on its head. It asks a really powerful question. What if society itself is the one creating deviance by literally pushing certain groups to its very edges? This process is called marginalisation. Just imagine entire groups of people, say young people in neglected inner-city areas, who are denied access to good jobs, decent schools, and any real political power. They're effectively pushed to the fringes of society, left to look in from the outside. And the path that leads here is often tragically predictable. It starts with a lack of resources, a lack of opportunity. When people start to feel like society has absolutely nothing to offer them, well, their commitment to following society's rules starts to fade. And in that vacuum, turning to a subculture or acts of defiance can become a way to build an identity, to find some sense of purpose. And that brings us to our fourth, and honestly our most radical perspective, the power lens. What if deviance isn't a problem we need to solve? What if it's a form of resistance? This theory argues that breaking the rules can actually be a political act, a way of fighting back against a system that feels fundamentally unfair. From a neo-Marxist point of view, when groups with no power feel trapped and they can't start some big revolution, their resistance becomes symbolic. Their clothes, their music, their whole attitude, it all becomes a weapon in a kind of cultural war. It's a way to reject the very system that pushed them aside in the first place. So, what's the evidence for this stuff? Well, let's look at a pretty modern case study. Paul Hodkinson's fantastic research on goth subculture. And what's really cool is he was a critical insider. He actually took part in the goth scene himself, so he could understand it from the inside out. So what did Hodgkins find? Well, for the people in the scene, being goth wasn't just a phase. It wasn't just about fashion. It was a core part of their identity. They built this really strong, supportive community with their own media, their own shops, their own festivals, creating a real, meaningful alternative to a mainstream world where they just didn't feel like they belonged. And the big takeaway here is that the goth scene basically works like a modern-day tribe. It's this whole self-contained world with its own economy, its own media, its own social rules. So this isn't just about not conforming to the mainstream, it's about conforming to a really powerful alternative culture that gives its members a deep sense of belonging. So after looking through all these different lenses, we're kind of back where we started, but with a whole new perspective. It's clear that rule breaking is rarely a simple act. It can be a product of your upbringing, a sign of loyalty to a different group, a symptom of society pushing you away, or even an act of political resistance. So the real question isn't just why do people break rules? The much more interesting question is whose rules are they breaking? And why were those rules even created in the first place?